We are back with part 2 of The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. This was a very short section of this series. I believe I may have misspoken last time. I believe there will be 6 parts to this series, but because I think there are 5 different staves or chapters, however it is that you want to refer to these portions, portionments, and then we will have a review of the video now, or the series. The short story itself. This video will be broken down into 3 sections, a So What Happened recap of this portion of the short story. Then we have a literary criticism section, which I think has some really fun talking. Well, I say fun. It's fun to me. Maybe normal people won't quite think as much, but I think some really fun talking points as far as things that you can sort of draw out of this text. And then finally, one note for the writer's corner. What can we learn from this text as writers ourselves? So, what happened? Our narrator wakes up at midnight as the Swede still sleeps. He is overwhelmed by fear. There is this undulating fear inside of him. The bushes and the willows waving under the midnight moon transform into monsters before his very eyes, and he decides against waking the Swede. Then he feels an overwhelming urge to wander further out into his habitat. And then he collapses to worship, or he would have, had the wind not bullied him first. He just watches the monsters, or the willows as they meld into the sky, and then he goes back to bed. So, sort of perhaps a strange stopping point for this stave of the short story, but that's what we're going to talk about in the writer's corner portion of this. But where I want to start is with that literary criticism section, and here's the opening paragraph here. Suddenly I found myself lying awake, peering from my sandy mattress through the door of the tent. I looked at my watch pinned against the canvas and saw by the bright moonlight that it was past 12 o'clock, the threshold of a new day, and I had therefore slept a couple of hours. The Swede was still asleep beside me. The wind howled as before. Something plucked at my heart and made me feel afraid. There was a sense of disturbance in my immediate neighborhood. There was a disturbance in the force. Now, part of cosmic horror, part of horror in general, and I think part of the appeal, at least so far, of this story is not how alien everything feels. That's good. That's certainly intriguing. But I think part of the true power of this story so far is how familiar certain parts of this are. Have you never woken up a couple of hours into sleep and all of a sudden felt that plucking at your heart, making you afraid, and you cannot say for what? Perhaps it was some nightmare. Perhaps some undigested bit of cheese, as we are told in A Christmas Carol. Perhaps it is that you were laying there wondering what it is that you have done with your life. You are X number of years old. Shouldn't you be somewhere more substantial than where it is that you are? Doesn't that happen to you? Staying up late at night or waking up in the middle of the night? I think that is such a common occurrence that when we are placing that common human occurrence that, by the way, no one talks about. No, those are your moments, right? So when you read this short story and you recognize your moment here, it hits you straight on. All of a sudden you're invested, right? The next thing worth talking about here, this is a couple paragraphs in, I think it's paragraph 3. I was halfway out, kneeling on all fours, when my eyes first took in the tops of the bushes opposite, with their moving tracery of leaves, made shapes against the sky. I sat back on my haunches and stared. It was incredible, surely, but there, opposite and slightly above me, were shapes of some indeterminate sort among the willows, and as the branches swayed in the wind they seemed to group themselves about these shapes, forming a series of monstrous outlines that shifted rapidly beneath the moon, close, about 50 feet in front of me. I saw these things. This paragraph. There are so many things to talk about in this paragraph that seems to be kind of just setting up some horror. But what are we actually doing in this paragraph? Well, our speaker, with whom we are familiar at this point, we know that he is not a loon, right? We know that he is at least mostly believable. He looks out and he sees these willows, shadows, transformed into monsters. And look, if you've ever had that moment where you wake yourself up in the middle of the night and you're sitting there wondering, afraid at what you're going to do for the rest of your life, probably you have had a moment something like this too, where you see a shadow and in your mind you know you're transfiguring it, but you can do that, right? Oh, you know what that looks like? It looks like an XYZ. Yeah, it does, right? Or how you recognize shapes in the clouds. It's the same thing. But what it actually is, if we're willing to dig into philosophy, if we're willing to dig into psychology, and if we're willing to dig into maybe a bit of the abnormal psychology, it is several different things. There is something called absurdism, and I got this definition of absurdism from Google. Absurdism is a philosophy centered on the fundamental conflict between humanity's innate search for meaning and the universe's inherent irrationality and meaninglessness. It states that the universe has no intrinsic purpose or order, and any attempt to find one is a futile endeavor that leads to a state of the absurd. Rather than succumbing to despair, absurdism encourages an active embrace of this contradiction through a joyous revolt. You laugh at how crazy everything is. By creating personal meaning in the moment, cultivating resilience, and living fully despite the lack of ultimate purpose. So what does this moment, recognizing the shapes in the trees, have to do with absurdism? There is, in many absurdist stories, poems, novels, musings, there's a moment. And in that moment, someone might be sitting at a dining room table and suddenly observe how absolutely wild it is that they are eating dead plants on top of a dead tree. You're eating a salad at the table? No, those are dead plants, and you have them on top of a dead tree that you're using little bits of metal to push past the exposed bone in your body. Your teeth are just bones that we can see. That is an absurdist realization. Oftentimes, these absurdist realizations happen once in an absurdist story, and then the entire world is changed. Is this not a little bit like an absurdist moment? Looking out and realizing, yeah, those are willows and bushes, but all I have to do is make up my mind, and all of a sudden they're monsters. And now I can flip them back. And now I can make them monsters again. Well, if we can do that with bushes and monsters, how many things can we just decide we're going to see in a different way during the course of our everyday life? And once we make that decision, no one gets to tell us anything again, right? The minute you tell me I'm not taking things seriously enough, if I look at you like this, you really do look like a clown, don't you? Yeah, look at that nose you've got, right? So it is, in my opinion, a bit of an absurdist moment. It also makes me think of the uncanny from Freud. The concept of the uncanny was later elaborated on and developed by Sigmund Freud in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche, or The Uncanny, which also draws on the work of Hoffmann, whom Freud considers the unrivaled master of the uncanny in literature. However, he criticizes Jentsch's belief that Olympia is the central uncanny element of the story. I shouldn't have done all this. I cannot think and hope most readers of the story will agree with me. Okay, instead, I did this wrong, I apologize. Instead, Freud draws on a wholly different element of the story, namely, the idea of being robbed of one's eyes, to be the most striking instance of uncanniness in the tale. He focuses on how the anxiety of their loss is not unlike male castration anxiety. He continues explaining how this anxiety may lead a male audience robbed of their masculinity feeling the uncanny. Their masculinity being robbed provides Freud the foundation to illustrate a central contributor to male fear. And the gender part is not necessary here, so just keep that in mind. Freud goes on for the remainder of the essay to identify uncanny effects that result from instances of repetition of the same thing. Think of all of the different willows, different bushes that end up looking the same, linking the concept to that of repetitious compulsion. He includes incidents wherein one becomes lost and accidentally retraces one's steps, and instances wherein random numbers recur, seemingly meaningful. Here, Freud may be said to be prefiguring the concept that Jung would later refer to as synchronicity. He also discusses the uncanny nature of Otto Ranke's concept of the double. So the uncanny nature of this is that simply you are all of a sudden aware of the strangeness of something that should be familiar to you. That is what I think is going on with that paragraph as well. And finally, something called derealization. Derealization is an alteration in the perception. Let me start this over. Derealization is an alteration in the perception of the external world, causing those with the condition to perceive it as unreal, distant, distorted, or in other ways falsified. Other symptoms include feeling as if one's environment lacks spontaneity, emotional coloring, and depth. Described as experiences of unreality or detachment with respect to surroundings, e.g., individuals or objects are experienced as unreal. The monsters are unreal, but they are being experienced in place of something that is very real. dreamlike, foggy, lifeless, or visually distorted. In the DSM-5, it is a dissociative symptom that may appear in moments of severe stress. We do have someone in a severe stress, do we not? And just a couple paragraphs later than this in the story, we get this quote. Our intrusion had stirred the powers of the place into activity. What powers of the place? It was we who were the cause of the disturbance, and my brain filled to bursting with stories and legends of the spirits and deities of places that have been acknowledged and worshipped by men in all ages of the world's history. There are definitely some interesting things going on here with the sense of purpose and powerlessness, and how the danger in this short story seems to happen suddenly, and when danger happens suddenly, you feel more powerless in the situation, right? So if you are approaching danger, then maybe you have time to steel yourself. But it reminds me of something that has always stuck out to me from the Bible. In the Ten Commandments, I believe it's Commandment 1, right? Thou shalt have no other strange gods before me. Now, there's a couple things going on with, well, it depends on the interpretation that you're getting it from, right? But there are a couple of different things going on with this here first commandment. First off, I want to take you down the journey of this word here. Thou shalt have no other strange gods before me. When you pair other with the word strange, this is the Abrahamic God acknowledging that he is, in fact, strange. That's funny to me. If we are taking an absurdist bent through this text, that is funny to me. You can't worship any other weirdos, is what the Abrahamic God is saying. But here's another thing to consider when we have this commandment. Thou shalt have no other strange gods before me. This commandment doesn't say, hey, guys, you know there's no other gods, right? It just says you can't worship any. The original sort of framing in the religious texts of the Abrahamic God was one of a regional god, was one of a god of these people. Now, there is an interesting sort of perhaps ironically, evolution of the idea of gods along the way. It used to be that sort of there was a god for everything. There were gods everywhere. And then by the time we get to the Greeks, they were on Olympus. So at least they were in one spot. And by the time we get to the Christians, there's just one God, right? So it's constantly wheedling down. But one thing that a lot of places have returned to over time, and not with finality, but one of these ideas that kind of keeps popping up through the wheel of time, recursively through time, is the idea of paganism. And you cannot tell me that a lot of the moments in this short story do not feel like paganism. Sudden realization that there are gods in all the trees, right? That there are spirits in the forest. I don't know a whole lot about paganism, all right? But it does feel something like that here. And while it does, we might as well move forward to the next quote here. These things I knew were real, and proved that my senses were acting normally. Yet the figure still rose from earth to heaven, silent majestically, in a great spiral of grace and strength that overwhelmed me at length with a genuine deep emotion of worship. I felt I must fall down and worship, absolutely worship. I felt I must fall down and worship, absolutely worship. Where is he getting that from? Worship what? He certainly never mentions the Abrahamic God. Never mentions that. Is this that nature is so overpowering to those of us who have been quote-unquote civilized or quote-unquote domesticated that we would automatically turn to paganism upon a return to the wild? Is this story an advocation for paganism? All of these things are very, all of these feelings of worship and powerlessness, they're not connected to a religious text. They're all connected to the bit of nature which might be described as the most foreboding. Is there something about fear that puts the religion into us? I think that these are questions we are prompted to ask by this short story. Then we get this a little bit later. It must be a subjective experience, I argued, none the less real for that, but still subjective. The moonlight and the branches combined to work out these pictures upon the mirror of my imagination, and for some reason I projected them outwards and made them appear objective. I knew this must be the case, of course. I took courage and began to move forward across the open patches of sand. By Jove, though, was it all hallucination? Was it merely subjective? Did not my reason argue in the old futile way from the little standard of the known? Objective truth versus subjective experience. This is something that we are delving into with this short story so far as well. Objective truth. Provable things versus subjective experience. Boy, it sure did feel like it. Objectively, those are willows, those are bushes. Subjectively, my God, look at all the monsters. Now, which one matters? Well, it's the objective truth, right? Those are just bushes, those are just willows. They're not monsters. But if one of those monsters said, hey, steal the canoe and go home, and our narrator steals the canoe and goes home, the objective willows and bushes did nothing. The subjective monsters told our protagonist to steal the canoe, and he did. The objective bushes and willows did nothing. The subjective monsters changed the course of both of these characters' lives. So that is something to watch moving forward. Also, maybe my favorite point in this whole shebang here. Our protagonist has talked about being lonely. Our protagonist has talked about being scared. Our protagonist wakes up in the middle of the night scared. Our protagonist's first observation while waking up in the middle of the night is that the Swede is still asleep. Our protagonist's first instinct is to wake the Swede up. Meaning, our protagonist does not just wake up scared, he wakes up lonely. Otherwise, he wouldn't even dream of disturbing someone else's sleep, especially not after a day as strenuous as these two have had. But once he wakes up, and he notices those willows and those bushes start turning into creatures, start morphing into monsters, start melding into marauders of the midnight. Once our protagonist notices that, he doesn't talk about being lonely anymore. He doesn't talk about being afraid anymore. Is it that he recognizes his community in those monsters and in those creatures? That is something I am definitely going to be keeping an eye on moving forward in this text. The one writer's note that I have here is this. This is a short chapter. This is a short stave. However it is that you want to refer to it. I think it is very tempting for a whole lot of writers to stick in here, to linger around, to take what they believe they are writing is a longer piece and use that as rationale to justify rambling in a short chapter like this. That's not necessary. If this is the chapter, man, this is the chapter. You end it and you move on. Others go instinctively the other direction. Think of William Faulkner, As I Lay Dying, the chapter which says, "My mother is a fish." That feels almost as much to prod the writer as does a chapter which is obstinately long. I think they're different. Faulkner has a whole lot of skill in being able to pop on the page, say, "My mother is a fish," and then dip out, and you don't even question it. But I think that a lot of writers are tempted to take a chapter like this and try to beef it up. I think it's worth remembering that you don't have to. The only thing to which your story has to be true is itself. That's a subjective reality. That is all I have for this video. The second in a 6-part series, Journeying Through the Willows by Algernon Blackwood. If you like or appreciate this sort of thing, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.